Welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition of the show will discuss strengthening public-private partnership for a sustainable Nigerian economy. On the sidelines of the just concluded 2024 Africa Social Impact Summit, which discussed the theme Reimagining Progress, a new blueprint for sustainable growth in Africa, I engaged Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, the Managing Director of Sterling Bank, on how Nigeria can leverage the public-private partnership model to address key economic challenges. Here's the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, for featuring on this Economy and Politics program.
Thank you.
First, let's begin with the concerns in Nigeria, as Nigeria desires to be the leading destination in Africa for investments and also compete globally for capital. The major challenge has been that public-private partnership, that nexus. So I would like to begin with how critical is it for public-private partnership to be strengthened in Nigeria as an economy?
Thank you. The idea that for us to build the kind of infrastructure we need and the kind of economy that is required for prosperity can only be done by partnership has been with us for a while. But as we reflect on previous efforts and the successes we've recorded, one of the things that's become obvious to me is that if you do not have a public-private partnership at the point of policy, it is unlikely that you would have a successful public-private partnership at the point of execution. What I worry about is that a lot of the policies and the laws that are coming out does not have enough element of collaboration between the executors, which to my mind would always be the larger population, often represented by the private sector, but really it is the citizenship that is the private sector, and the government, specifically the National Assembly. What would benefit the country more is for us to start that collaboration. The PPP needs to first start at the point of policy. Then it goes on into some level of collaboration at the point of engagement. Because between policy and project, there has to be engagement. There has to be communication. There has to be some form of summit where people come together to understand what both sides want, and then they can do public-private partnership. But it's clear to all of us that no matter how big we grow the government would never be big enough to create the employment that we want. And without creating that employment, especially high-value employment where the value add is significant, then the government is never going to be big enough to solve big problems. So it's one of those wicked problems where if you start with the wrong solution, it spirals out of control very quickly. And the wrong solution is one that dictates from the top to the bottom, because then it doesn't work.
And you talked about summits and having that forum. Of course, you've been involved with the Nigeria Economy Summit Group, which is the leading public-private sector advocacy group. Federal government through the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, and of course the Nigeria Economy Summit Group, NESG. There has been this plan 2030 and 2050 National Development Plan, which of course recently Crochet wrote about the need for it to be reset, October 23rd, 2020, that article. How is it important for us to align a national development plan and of course with our budget? Because that is where private sector want to know how they continue to engage and where they can support.
An ideal situation when it comes to planning would be for the Ministry of Planning to absorb all the content that has been generated by the Nigerian Economic Summit, for instance, and other similar organizations, so that when the national plan comes out, it would include all the elements of the private sector input that is needed. But that's not what we have today, because the plans themselves are not necessarily aligned to what is going on at the summit. We like the collaboration with government when it comes to the summit. What we are hoping for is that, irrespective of the administration in power, the outcome of this summit needs to become part of what we take forward. Because it's not everything that has to change because there is a change in government. There are things that we must commit to, irrespective of the party in power, irrespective of the government in power. That way we can build consistency. Because there is no trust when there is no consistency. The government must understand that the private sector needs to believe that there are certain things that will continue irrespective of politics. That, for me, is where the plan fails to meet the expectation of the public. The idea that there are certain parts of the plan that are constant, they are consistent, and we'll see them through.
And speaking to that, in that article, they highlighted the issue of economic ideology. Nigeria needs to define its economic ideology, irrespective of government. I'm not talking about government, I was economic ideology. With your experience in banking and the advocacy you do for impact investments, and also working with several private sector players and with governments like subnational Lagos and others, how critical is economic ideology for Nigeria to begin to be that destination where we can attract more investments and, of course, we can see more economic activities pour?
What investors are looking for is evidence that you can deliver productively and competitively, right? So investors are constantly looking for competitiveness in the workforce. To what extent are you investing in your workforce, and therefore to what extent can they deliver? They are looking for competitiveness in policies. To what extent have you invested in ease of doing business and policies that makes it easy for businesses to be established and well run? They're also looking for competitiveness in ecosystem. To what extent have you brought together the different components of manufacturing, for instance, such that when you do have someone operating in that ecosystem, they obviously can compete. And also they're looking for logistics competitiveness. So beyond ideology, I think we need to first of all ask, what are the components of competitiveness that are not negotiable? As for ideology, the primary one is who should control capital. In some spaces, capital has been controlled largely by government and has been successful. In other places, not so much. And for us, we need to ask who will manage the capital better. If there was evidence, for instance, that the government will run the industrial projects better than the private sector, I absolutely will subscribe to that. But if the evidence is to the contrary, that private sectors are likely to run those projects better, then whatever ideology we have must favor putting capital in the hands of private sector. And then government can tax the profits and take care of their social objectives.
You're very big on trust, and that trust comes with policy clarity, communication, and engagement. How critical is that as we look at our country? The current administration has 8-point agenda, clearly stated out, but there is need to get more buy-in of private sector, get more investments in. Our last capital importation report, we didn't make up to $150 million in FDIs. We need FDIs to grow the economy. How critical is communication, political policy clarity, engagement in that regard?
Well, I guess we must first ensure that we have one government. Sometimes you can have a government in power and there are multiple agencies of government acting in ways that are contradictory. That's, to my mind, creates a lot more disenchantment, but also people become a lot more suspicious because, again, there is no common truth. So if there's one thing that the government needs to do is to ensure that whatever the presidency has determined to be the direction of the government, that everyone sings from the same hymn sheet so that there are no contradictions. That's one item that is critical right now. The other part of it is there has to be communication. And I'm not interested in the one-page press releases. They don't tell us enough. There has to be engagement with stakeholders, either before these policies become public or preferably before they're finally made public, where deep conversations will be had as to what it implies, what the government wants from the investor community, what the investor communities want in return. And these understandings are then baked into policies, and then the policies are then implemented. So clarity is important, but communication is equally important, such that we make sure that the outcome, that is the collective outcome that people have signed up on, will be delivered. Right now, they're not being delivered because people understand policies differently. What the government wants out of it and what the investor communities have read into it are sometimes very different.
Then, liberalization, privatization has transformed Nigeria's economy. We've seen it. But there's always this concerns around monopoly and laws and all that. So I want to ask you, there are several sectors that need incentives. You cannot say with monopoly. For example, petroleum refining, tech infrastructure, whether it's broadband, pharmaceuticals, some components of manufacturing. What would you like to see going forward in terms of enablers, incentives, and even legislation? Because I know that in NESG, there's a NASBA, the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable, which of course you've been involved actively.
I think we're worrying about monopoly too early in the day. Most economies that have become very vibrant and very competitive once had some element of monopoly. And the reason is that whoever is an early starter would enjoy some advantages that mean that they will grow very quickly if they are efficient. And it will take a while for those who come second and third to catch up and then create a competitive environment. So I think the worry about monopoly is, to my mind, misplaced. We should worry about creating an environment where there will be free entry and free exit, right? The real monopoly is one that is by law. When the monopoly is as a result of market competitiveness, then all you have to do is ensure that people abide by the rules, and eventually other players will come into being. So I don't worry about monopoly. Regarding what incentives should be in play, my sense is that the most powerful incentive is one that alters the market. In other words, create the marketplace and let people come in to compete. Our obstacle today are usually because government is interfering in pricing and market spaces. And so investors are reluctant to invest. And it makes sense. If you go out today and you fix the price of a product that you don't produce, producers are unlikely to take a bet on the price that you have fixed. Government needs to understand that. What government has to do or must do, especially in spaces where they have invested in creating the marketplace or where there are monopoly tendencies, is to use the instrument of fiscal policy to then adjust that, either by taxing monopolies and using the proceeds to encourage competitiveness in the space, or in some cases where they've invested in the marketplace, then they can count on the fact that the employment being generated and the SMEs benefiting would then be the true reward for the investment. So I don't see it as an expense. I see creating the environment for these sectors to grow as an investment for which government gets a significant return over time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, MDC of Stellenbosch. Always difficult to have you despite your busy schedule, but thanks for taking out this time.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for supporting the summit.
Thank you.
From this interview, it is clear, as stated in the ProShare article, that establishing, nurturing, and promoting collaborative frameworks will facilitate aligning private sector initiatives with government policies, fostering a conducive environment for sustainable economic growth and development. The private sector also needs to be engaged in all the bilateral and multilateral agreements by the Nigerian government, and there needs to be an alignment between the national development plans and the budget. And that'll be all for this edition of Economy and Politics Show. To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this conversation, especially the whole development around economy and public-private partnership value, visit our website displayed on the screen, and also follow our social media platforms to engage further. Till we come your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socio-economic developments around you, because it is a wise thing to do. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.